Huitzilopochtli was no mere god. He was the embodiment of duality, war and light, destruction and renewal. Born as the god of the sun and war, he was more than a deity in the eyes of the Aztecs. He was their eternal protector, the pulse of their battle-driven existence. His story begins in the heavens, where the sun relentlessly climbs each day, its fiery path over the earth symbolic of the unyielding spirit of the Aztec warriors. The sun, moving in its eternal cycle, was the perfect reflection of their own undying drive, whether in war or in the grind of everyday life. In artistic representations, Loboti would be seen adorned with feathers of vibrant hues, blue and green, colors that connected him to both the sky and the earth. His shield, decorated with the feathers of a hummingbird, and his spear, symbols of both war and the sun's dominance, made it clear. This was a god forged not only in battle, but in the ceaseless progression of time. Historians still argue whether Loboti's depiction as a warrior with a solar disk was meant to honor the Aztecs' belief in the cyclical nature of life, or to reflect their own militaristic mindset. Regardless, Loboti wasn't just a figure of reverence, he was a blueprint for their way of life. His victories were theirs. His struggles in the skies, against the dark forces of night, mirrored their own, as they fought not only to survive, but to thrive against any challenge. When the sun's rays fell upon them, it was his power that pushed back the shadows, just as they hoped their strength would push back the darkness of enemies' forces. In some of the most famous myths surrounding Loboti, his birth story stood as a monumental moment of both destruction and creation. In one version of his birth, Loboti was conceived by Guatlik, the goddess of the earth. This wasn't your typical divine birth. No. Loboti emerged, fully formed and armed from his mother's womb, standing tall, ready to face the world. But the world wasn't ready for him. His brothers, fearing his power, plotted to end his existence before it began. And yet, like the sun rising over the horizon, Loboti's force was unstoppable. He defeated his brothers, not with the gentle warmth of sunlight, but with the sheer power of his might. This was no gentle god, no passive protector. This was a warrior whose victory was symbolic of the sun's eternal battle against the night. The Aztecs didn't just see Loboti as a symbol of the sun's relentless rise. They saw him as a beacon for their own strength in the face of adversity. It's as if, every time they looked up at the sun, they were reminded that their own light, their own power, was a gift from the heavens. And to keep that light burning, sacrifices were necessary. But more on that later. The journey to their promised land was not a simple one for the Aztecs. Led by Huitzilopochtli's guidance, they embarked on a long and arduous pilgrimage that would test their endurance, faith, and belief in the divine. The myth goes that Loboti, in his eternal role as their protector, instructed the Aztecs to leave their homeland, Atlan, and seek a new place. A land where they would build the greatest empire the world had ever known. Loboti didn't just tell them where to go, though. He gave them a sign, a divine marker that would indicate the exact spot to build their city. An eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake, an image so profound that it would become the central symbol of their empire, later immortalized in the Mexican coat of arms. Historians still argue whether this vision of the eagle was a celestial omen or a cleverly crafted story to give the Aztecs a sense of divine destiny. Regardless of the historical accuracy, the symbol of the eagle, cactus, and snake became a beacon of hope for the Aztecs, signaling their journey toward the Valley of Mexico. As the journey stretched on, the migration was far from smooth. The Aztecs faced constant conflicts, delays, and hardships, and yet their belief in Loboti's promise kept them moving forward. Even when they were near defeat, Loboti's voice, carried through priests and sacred visions, guided them, offering counsel, comfort, and commands. Through trials that would have broken lesser people, the Aztecs pressed on, driven by a single image: the eagle, perched proudly on a cactus, devouring its enemy. It was not just a sign of victory, it was the very thing they needed to feel validated in their struggle. And when they finally reached the fertile lands of the Valley of Mexico, they saw it, the sign. There it was, a majestic eagle perched upon a cactus, grasping a serpent in its claws. It was no coincidence. Laboti had led them here, to a place of prosperity, a fertile valley surrounded by a great central lake. It was the perfect location for their city, and they knew that this would be the site of their capital. They called their new home Tenochtitlan, and it would become the heart of the Aztec Empire, one of the largest and most powerful cities of its time. But more than that, it symbolized their divine mission, a mission that Laboti had set in motion. Their city was now their empire, their light, and their future. And as they settled into this new land, they knew that Laboti was watching over them, guiding them through every hardship, every challenge, and every battle. But for the Aztecs, their journey didn't end with the founding of their city. Their survival, and the survival of the sun itself, would require more than just divine favor. It would require sacrifice. The demand for sacrifice is often one of the most misunderstood aspects of Aztec culture, but to the Aztecs, it was a sacred necessity, especially for the continuation of life itself. The sun, they believed, could only continue its journey across the sky if it was nourished by the blood of their enemies. And this was where Vaisal Laboti's power truly came into play. As the god of the sun and war, Laboti's need for human blood wasn't a grim demand, it was a cosmic need. The very movement of the sun, rising and falling each day, was contingent upon the sacrifices made to sustain it. Without this, the sun would fall into darkness, taking the world with it. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs viewed these sacrifices as an essential part of their spiritual understanding of the universe, or if it was simply a manifestation of their warlike nature. But one thing is clear: the act of sacrifice was seen as the highest form of devotion. It wasn't a random act of violence, but a ritualistic offering meant to keep the cosmic balance intact. Laboti, as the god at the center of this belief, was their constant reminder that the sun's journey, just like the Aztecs, depended on persistence, effort, and sacrifice. In every Aztec city, temples were built with a single purpose: to honor their gods and keep the universe in motion. The Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, for example, had 2 altars, one dedicated to Vaisal Laboti, the other to his counterpart Tlaloc, the god of rain. Here, under the watchful eyes of the gods, prisoners were offered up in the name of divine protection and cosmic balance. As the warriors captured prisoners during raids or battles, they brought them to these altars, where they would be sacrificed in elaborate ceremonies. The act of sacrifice itself wasn't a simple killing. It was a deeply symbolic event. The heart, the essence of life itself, was removed and offered to Laboti. This, the Aztecs believed, was the key to keeping the sun alive and in motion. These rituals were not just acts of faith, they were acts of survival. As the Aztecs expanded their empire, their gods demanded more. The larger the empire grew, the greater the demand for sacrifice, as the Aztecs believed that their survival was directly tied to these offerings. To them, the sun's power could not be maintained without the continuous giving of life. It wasn't just the military might of the Aztecs that kept them victorious. It was their religious devotion to Laboti, whose power fueled their campaigns and their city's growth. But this constant cycle of bloodletting and devotion wasn't without its darker side. The more sacrifices made, the more the gods required. And as the empire expanded, so did the scale of these rituals. What started as a method of survival slowly morphed into a powerful tool for control and fear. A reminder that the gods were not to be ignored, and that every rise of the sun came at a cost. The very fabric of Aztec society became intertwined with this belief, so deeply ingrained that it shaped everything from politics to personal identity. In Aztec society, the role of the warrior was not merely a profession, it was a sacred calling. Warriors were not just soldiers. They were the living embodiment of the gods themselves, chosen to carry out the divine will on earth. And at the heart of their military expansion was Vaisal Laboti, the god of both the sun and war. As the Aztecs expanded their empire, Laboti's influence was evident in every battle. every conquest. His blessings were sought, his favor essential to their success. The Aztecs believed that the sun god not only protected them, but also guided them, empowering them to defeat their enemies with divine precision. However, Laboti's role as a war god was not just about battle strategy. His presence was an essential spiritual force that made the Aztec warriors feel invincible. This was especially true when the warriors were preparing for battle. Rituals were held before each campaign, and the warriors would receive blessings from Laboti's priests, invoking his protection and favor. The war god's energy infused the warriors with a sense of purpose, an unshakable belief that victory was a matter of divine destiny. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs truly believed they were invincible or if it was more of a psychological tactic used to inspire fear in their enemies. What is clear, however, is that the Aztec army was structured around both religious and military prowess, with each victory marking the Aztecs as favored by the gods. Their military tactics were intricately tied to their beliefs, with warriors trained not just in the arts of combat, but also in rituals that prepared them to serve their gods. Huitzilopochtli Laboti's influence didn't stop at the battlefield. It extended to every part of Aztec society. He was the guiding force that pushed them to seek new lands, to conquer neighboring peoples, and to establish their empire. But while the Aztecs gained new territory, it wasn't without sacrifice. Every victory came at a cost, and the price was steep. As the empire grew, so did the demand for prisoners of war, as they were seen as valuable offerings to the gods. Every conquered city, every defeated enemy, was viewed as a gift to Laboti. The capture of prisoners became more than just a military success. It was a religious duty. The sacrifices were seen as a way to repay the gods for their blessings, to honor them for their divine protection. The warriors, therefore, played a double role as both combatants and holy figures, spiritual agents carrying out divine will. This intricate dance between war and religion was the core of the Aztec Empire's success. Their empire was built not just on military might, but on a profound spiritual connection to their gods, especially Laboti. Without his blessing, they believed, they would be nothing. Every battle, every conquest, was simply a means of honoring him and ensuring the continued rise of the sun. As the empire grew, so did the demand for sacrifices, making Laboti's role in the Aztec Empire one of the most powerful forces in their entire culture. But the belief in Laboti as a war god had consequences. As the empire expanded, so did the scale of the violence. It wasn't just enough to conquer and sacrifice. The very fabric of Aztec society began to revolve around the constant cycle of war, sacrifice, and divine favor. Every campaign was seen as a way to honor the gods, but as the Aztecs grew more powerful, so did the need for greater sacrifices, pushing the boundaries of their spiritual practices. While Huitzilopochtli was the god of war and the sun, guiding the Aztec warriors in their conquests, another deity quietly exerted influence over the soul of the Aztec civilization, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Quetzalcoatl wasn't just a god of the heavens, he was a god of knowledge, culture, and life itself. Whereas Laboti was revered for his destructive power, Quetzalcoatl represented creation, wisdom, and harmony. This contrast was the very essence of the Aztec worldview. Two forces in constant tension, each essential to the balance of the universe. Historians still debate whether Quetzalcoatl's portrayal as a peaceful, benevolent god was a political tool designed to counterbalance the military nature of Aztec society, or if it was truly a reflection of their belief in the duality of existence. Regardless, Quetzalcoatl became a symbol of wisdom and enlightenment. He was the patron of priests, the guide of farmers, and the guardian of civilization. His role as the god of life was especially crucial to the Aztecs, who, while fierce in war, were also deeply connected to the natural world and the cycles of agriculture. Quetzalcoatl's wisdom was not just about knowledge, it was about the practical aspects of survival. He taught the Aztecs the arts of farming, how to cultivate maize, how to weave, and even how to compose poetry. He gave them the tools not only to survive but to thrive. The gods were not just powerful entities to be feared, they were also teachers, helping the people understand the world around them and how to shape it for their benefit. Quetzalcoatl's dual nature, his ability to guide both the spiritual and practical aspects of life, made him a god beloved by the Aztecs. Where Laboti represented the harsh reality of war, Quetzalcoatl symbolized the hope for a brighter, more harmonious world. But as with all things in the Aztec pantheon, Quetzalcoatl's influence was not without conflict. His peaceful nature came into direct conflict with the more destructive forces within the Aztec pantheon. Quetzalcoatl's struggle against these forces, especially Tezcatlipoca, the god of night and chaos, is a central theme in Aztec mythology. Their battle represented the eternal conflict between order and disorder, creation and destruction, and life and death. While Quetzalcoatl's wisdom and kindness were celebrated, they also made him vulnerable to the darker forces in the universe. In the grand scheme of things, Quetzalcoatl was also seen as a god who could bring about transformation, something the Aztecs believed was essential for the continuity of life. His feathered serpent form symbolized this duality. He was both a being of the earth and the heavens, representing the potential for change and growth. In Aztec thought, transformation wasn't just about survival. It was about evolution, about the possibility for humanity to transcend its limitations and connect with the divine. Quetzalcoatl's teachings were passed down through priests, who carried his wisdom into the everyday lives of the people. He was a symbol of hope, of the promise that the world could be better, more peaceful, and filled with wisdom. Yet, even his wisdom had a cost. The very forces that sought to undo his work, the chaotic forces of Tezcatlipoca, reminded the Aztecs that every blessing, every teaching, came at a price. But still, Quetzalcoatl's influence endured, not just in the rituals performed in his honor, but in the very fabric of Aztec culture, where his name was invoked during times of peace, prosperity, and ironically in times of war as well. Mictlantecuhtli, the god of death and the ruler of the underworld, was one of the most powerful and ominous figures in Aztec mythology. His realm, Mictlan, was where all souls went after death, regardless of their earthly status, unless they had died in particularly honorable ways, such as in battle or childbirth. Mictlan was not a place of eternal torment, as in some other cultures' conceptions of the afterlife, but a place of rest, a final resting place for the soul. But despite its more peaceful nature, Mictlan was ruled by Mictlantecuhtli, who held dominion over death itself, and his counterpart, Mictlantecuhtli, the Lady of Mictlan. Historians still argue whether Mictlan was intended to represent an acceptance of death as part of the natural cycle, or if it was a reflection of the Aztecs' fear of the inevitable. Regardless, Mictlan was essential to the Aztecs' understanding of the universe and their role within it. For the Aztecs, death wasn't something to be feared. It was simply a transition, a part of the endless cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Mictlantecuhtli's presence in this cycle was seen as vital to maintaining cosmic order. He was the keeper of the dead, ensuring that souls made their way to their final resting place, and he was also a reminder that death was inevitable. The Aztecs believed that it was not enough for humans to live. They had to die in ways that ensured their passage to Mictlan was smooth, for only then could the cycle continue. Mictlantecuhtli, often depicted as a skeletal figure crowned with skulls and adorned with underworld jewelry, was an unsettling figure. His skeletal appearance symbolized his dominion over decay, the ultimate inevitability of all life. Yet, his very existence, while disturbing, also gave meaning to the Aztecs' understanding of mortality. Death was not the end, but a necessary phase in the cosmic balance. The role of Mictlantecuhtli, Mictlantecuhtli's wife, was equally significant. She shared responsibility for the underworld, ruling over the souls and making sure they were treated with respect. Together, they maintained the delicate balance between life and death. Mictlantecuht's skeletal imagery, too, symbolized her role in the afterlife. She was often depicted holding a mirror, a tool that reflected the true nature of one's soul. This was not a punishment, but a reminder that death brought with it the necessity of truth and purification. The Aztecs did not fear death in the same way many other cultures might have. Instead, they embraced it as part of the eternal cycle. The rituals surrounding death were important, and the sacrifices made by the living ensured that those who passed on would reach Mictlan and be properly honored. Mictlantecuht's realm was seen not as a place of horror, but as a necessary station where souls could rest before their eventual reincarnation or entry into a new phase of existence. This belief in the afterlife shaped the way the Aztecs viewed their own lives. They didn't see death as something to be feared, but rather as something that was simply part of a much larger and ongoing process. The rituals surrounding death and the afterlife, guided by Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuht, were there to ensure that the cycle of life continued, undisturbed, just as the sun rose and fell each day. Xiquicatl, the goddess of beauty, love, fertility, and flowers, was a revered figure in Aztec society. Unlike the warrior gods who thrived on battle and bloodshed, Xiquicatl symbolized creation and the softer, nurturing aspects of life. She was a goddess who embraced life in all its forms, youthful, beautiful, and ever-changing. Her connection to beauty and fertility made her particularly important for women, especially during pregnancy and childbirth. To the Aztecs, she was a protector and nurturer, watching over their most vulnerable moments. But Xiquicatl was not only a goddess of softness, she was also a goddess of strength and power, particularly when it came to her role in creating life. She was often depicted with flowers in her hair and adorned in precious jewels, representing her connection to both the natural world and the divine. Her face, often shaped like two serpents facing one another, symbolized the duality of life, the nurturing force of fertility and the consuming force of death, both essential to the continuation of life. Her role as the goddess of love and sexuality was equally significant. She was a divine force behind the passion and desire that drove the Aztecs' human relationships. Love, for the Aztecs, wasn't just an emotion, it was a divine gift, and Xiquicatl was the one who bestowed that gift. She was often called upon in rituals of marriage and fertility, where young women sought her blessings for healthy pregnancies and strong, happy marriages. Flowers, which were sacred to her, played a central role in these rituals. During these ceremonies, the Aztecs would use flowers to represent the fleeting nature of beauty and the potential for growth and renewal. Yet, Xiquicatl's beauty was not limited to the physical. Her influence extended to the arts too. She was seen as the goddess who inspired creativity in artists, musicians, and craftsmen. Just as she represented the beauty of life, she also represented the joy and artistry that could come from it. Weaving, singing, poetry, these all fell under her domain, as she was believed to nurture the skills that transformed everyday life into something divine. Her presence in Aztec mythology was not without complexity, however. Xiquicatl's marriages reflected her own dual nature. Her first marriage was to Quetzalcoatl, the god of the rising sun, but she soon left him for Talo, the god of rain. Some legends even suggest that her marriage to Talo was driven by a desire for greater satisfaction, an interesting reflection of her role as a goddess of love and sexual energy. Yet other stories suggest that Talo kidnapped her, adding a darker layer to her narrative. Despite these myths of love and loss, Xiquicatl remained a figure of hope and strength. The Aztecs saw her as a protector of women and a goddess who could bring both beauty and vitality to the world. Her role in their culture was vital, representing the full spectrum of human experience, from the joy of creation to the hardships of life. And just as the Aztecs viewed beauty as divine, they also viewed her sexuality and the passions that it inspired as sacred forces, both powerful and transformative. While the duality of Xiquicatl's existence wasn't always easy to navigate, it was this very complexity that made her a symbol of balance in the Aztec pantheon. Her influence touched every corner of life, from the most intimate relationships to the very fabric of artistic expression. She was a goddess who helped define the Aztecs' understanding of beauty, love, and the divine. Tezcatlipoca, the god of night, change, and chaos, was one of the most enigmatic and unpredictable deities in the Aztec pantheon. Unlike the bright, nurturing gods like Quetzalcoatl and Xiquicatl, Tezcatlipoca represented the darker forces of the universe, those elements that could throw everything into disarray and destruction. He was the god of the moon and the stars, the embodiment of fate, and the harbinger of transformation through chaos. His domain was not one of peace and stability, but of conflict and sudden shifts, where change could come quickly and without warning. Historians still debate whether Tezcatlipoca's chaotic nature was meant to symbolize a necessary counterbalance to the more harmonious gods, or whether it was simply a reflection of the Aztecs' understanding of the unpredictable forces of nature. What is clear, however, is that Tezcatlipoca played a crucial role in the cosmic balance. His existence was necessary for the world to continue to evolve. He represented the darkness that preceded every new beginning, a force that swept away the old to make room for the new. Tezcatlipoca's most iconic symbol was the jaguar, a nocturnal predator known for its power, stealth, and strength. The jaguar for the Aztecs was more than just a fierce animal. It was a symbol of the night itself, moving silently and quickly through the darkness. Much like Tezcatlipoca's influence, jaguars were revered in Aztec culture, and their connection to the god of night was undeniable. In battle, the warriors, who wore jaguar skins or helmets designed to resemble jaguar heads, were thought to channel the god's power, embodying his strength, ferocity, and ability to move in and out of the shadows. Tezcatlipoca's influence wasn't confined to the physical realm. It extended into the realm of sorcery and fate as well. He was a god of magic, a manipulator of the unseen forces that governed both human life and the natural world. Many believed that Tezcatlipoca had the ability to weave the fates of mortals and gods alike, pulling the strings of destiny from behind the veil of darkness. In this way, he could be seen as a god of paradox. He was both a destroyer and a creator, a bringer of chaos who was essential to the cyclical nature of existence. Despite his association with chaos and destruction, Tezcatlipoca was also deeply connected to the idea of fate and transformation. In Aztec thought, nothing was permanent. Every cycle of life was subject to change, and change often came through upheaval. This was where Tezcatlipoca's role as the god of change and chaos became vital. His presence reminded the Aztecs that life was constantly in motion, constantly shifting between creation and destruction. His actions often set the stage for the rise of new eras, whether through the overthrow of old gods, the fall of civilizations, or the ushering in of new cosmic cycles. The tension between Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, symbolized this constant struggle between order and disorder. While Quetzalcoatl sought to maintain balance and harmony, Tezcatlipoca's force was unpredictable, chaotic, and disruptive. The two deities were often portrayed as opposing forces, one representing life's continuity through order and wisdom, the other symbolizing the necessary chaos that led to rebirth and renewal. Their rivalry and the complex relationship between them highlighted the Aztecs' belief in the need for balance in the universe. Too much order could stagnate life, and too much chaos could lead to destruction. Tezcatlipoca's actions were a reminder that in order for life to continue evolving, there needed to be moments of disruption, of breaking down the old to make way for the new. And although his methods were harsh and unpredictable, his role was crucial to the cycle of life that the Aztecs believed in so strongly. The fall of the Wind Age, as dictated by Tezcatlipoca's wrath, was a cataclysmic event in Aztec mythology. It wasn't merely a change in seasons or a shift in the stars. It was the abrupt destruction of an entire world. The wind, once a gentle force, became a brutal, unstoppable fury under the control of Tezcatlipoca. His fury unleashed a whirlwind of chaos, shaking the earth, scattering the heavens, and erasing what had once been. The humans who lived in the Wind Age were transformed, scattered into the wilds as animals, their once human forms devolving into the chaotic creatures of the earth. This transformation wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. The Aztecs believed that in times of extreme chaos, old forms must break down to allow for new life to emerge. The Wind Age represented a time of unpredictability, when humanity's destiny was shaped by forces beyond their control. This belief in the cyclical nature of time and existence meant that each era, no matter how prosperous, was destined to end. And so, when the Wind Age was destroyed by Tezcatlipoca's fury, it wasn't seen as a tragedy, but as a necessary event for the world to progress to its next phase. Historians still debate whether this cataclysmic destruction was a metaphor for the human struggle against external forces, whether it represented the constant battle against nature, death, and the unpredictable. But what is clear is that the Aztecs didn't view destruction as something to fear. To them, it was a process of cleansing and renewal. The world had to be broken down before it could be rebuilt. After all, just as the sun had to be nurtured through sacrifices to keep rising, so too did the world need to be purged before new life could emerge. The humans who survived the Wind Age were transformed. No longer were they the strong, heroic figures of the past. They had been turned into monkeys, creatures of the earth, as though the very act of survival had stripped them of their humanity. It was a brutal reminder that in the face of chaos, all things are subject to change. But even in this transformation, the Aztecs saw hope. The monkeys, in their new form, were adaptable, capable of surviving the harsh realities of their new world. They were not helpless. They had simply been reshaped by the forces of the universe. And this, the Aztecs believed, was the true essence of survival, adaptation. The fall of the Wind Age also signaled the end of an era, but the end of one cycle was never truly an end. It was always a beginning in disguise. Just as the sun must be fed by sacrifices to continue its path across the sky, the end of the Wind Age required a new force to emerge. The gods, ever vigilant, understood that the destruction of one world was necessary for the creation of another. As the ruins of the Wind Age settled into history, the gods prepared for the next stage in the cosmic journey. The fall of the Wind Age marked the first true test of the gods' power to create and destroy, a reminder that nothing in the universe was permanent. In the Aztec worldview, everything was temporary, cyclical, and subject to change. Chaos, destruction, and rebirth were all part of the natural order. The Wind Age's collapse wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the stepping stone to a new beginning, one that would see humanity rise again, transformed, ready for the next challenge that the gods would lay before them. After the devastating fall of the Wind Age, the gods set their sights on the next phase of creation, one where humanity would emerge anew, stronger, more resilient, and better suited for survival in a volatile world. This was not a smooth transition. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was entrusted with the task of shaping the new world and restoring balance. The gods knew that the destruction caused by Tezcatlipoca's wrath was necessary for growth, but it was now time for a new human, race to emerge from the ashes of the old. To create the new humanity, Quetzalcoatl embarked on a perilous journey into the depths of Mictlan, the underworld, to retrieve the bones of those who had come before. It was in Mictlan, a dark and dangerous place, that Quetzalcoatl found the bones of the ancient humans, buried deep in the realm of the dead. With the bones of past generations, Quetzalcoatl sought to bring life to a new era, mixing the bones with his own blood and the sacred maize, the divine gift to humanity. The maize, representing fertility and sustenance, was the foundation of the Aztec people's survival. It was through this divine ritual, a mixture of death, life, and creation, that the new humanity would take shape. Historians still debate whether Quetzalcoatl's descent into Mictlan and his act of resurrection symbolized the Aztecs' view of life's cyclical nature, or if it was a reflection of their belief in divine intervention. Nonetheless, This act of resurrection was central to the Aztec understanding of their world. They believed that life and death were inextricably linked, and that the gods themselves had to make sacrifices to ensure the continued existence of humanity. Through Quetzalcoatl's blood and the bones of the ancient ones, the new race was born, crafted from both divine essence and the earth itself. This new humanity was smaller, more adaptable, and more resilient than the giants of the previous world. The giants, who had inhabited the Wind Age, had been strong, but they had lacked the necessary traits to survive in the constantly changing world. The new humans, shaped by the gods' hands, were gifted with intelligence and the ability to cultivate, maize, to weave, and to build, skills that would help them thrive in an unpredictable world. The gods, particularly Quetzalcoatl, had infused them with wisdom, giving them the tools they needed not just to survive, but to evolve. The act of resurrection, though powerful, did not come without its own cost. Quetzalcoatl had to navigate the dangers of Mictlan, facing the gods of death who tried to thwart him at every turn. He passed through dark rivers, bone deserts, and labyrinthine traps, each obstacle more dangerous than the last. But through his determination, wisdom, and divine guidance, he succeeded in reclaiming the bones of the ancient humans, defying the lords of the underworld. This act of defiance, of battling death to bring life, was a central theme in Aztec myth. It symbolized not just the power of the gods, but the determination of humanity itself to rise again, no matter the odds. Once Quetzalcoatl had completed his task, the new humanity was born, infused with the blood of the gods and the wisdom of the earth. It was a humanity that was better suited to face the challenges ahead. The gods had given them the gift of maize, and with it, the power to nourish the earth and themselves. The new human race, though smaller in stature than the giants, was now capable of creating life, sustaining it, and ensuring that the cycle of existence would continue even after the fall of the previous worlds. In this way, the gods' intervention ensured the continuation of the world, and with it, the cosmic cycle. The new humanity, born from both the divine and the earth, was prepared to face the next great challenge, one that would ultimately bring them into the Age of Rain, where they would once again have to prove their worth and continue their connection to the divine. With the birth of the new humanity, the Aztecs believed that the gods had done their part. Humanity was ready to embark on the next stage of its journey. Yet, as with every great creation, the gods were not finished. They understood that their work would never truly be done. The new humans, born from both divine blood and the sacred, maize, would face the next challenge in the cosmic cycle, the Age of Rain. The Age of Rain was marked by its abundance and fertility. The world was lush with greenery, rivers flowed freely, and crops flourished under the rains sent by Tlaloc, the god of rain and water. The maize, now an essential part of the Aztec diet, grew abundantly, ensuring that the new humanity had everything they needed to survive. However, the Age of Rain was also a time of complacency. As the humans grew accustomed to the abundance of the earth, they began to take it for granted. They became complacent in their gratitude toward the gods, neglecting the rituals and sacrifices that had once been central to their survival. Historians still debate whether this complacency was a natural result of prosperity or a deliberate commentary on the dangers of human pride. What is clear is that the gods, who had once gifted humanity with the power to thrive, were now watching closely. Quetzalcoatl, the god of life, wisdom, and fertility, saw that the humans were becoming distant from the divine. They no longer revered the gods with the same fervor as they once had. Music, dance, and art, once expressions of devotion and gratitude, had become mere pastimes, devoid of spiritual meaning. Quetzalcoatl, deeply disappointed by the ingratitude of the humans, decided to act. He knew that without the proper balance, the world would fall into chaos once again. So, he sent a great flood to cleanse the world of humanity's arrogance. The rain, once a source of life, became a destructive force. Rivers overflowed, lakes expanded, and the world was drowned in a deluge of water, much like the one that had ended the Wind Age. The flood, while destructive, was not meant to wipe out humanity entirely. Rather, it was a divine purification, a cleansing that would allow humanity to start anew. The flood brought devastation, wiping out entire cities and drowning much of the old world. Yet, as with every cycle of destruction, there were survivors. A small group of humans, those who had sought refuge on floating debris or atop the tallest trees, managed to survive the flood. However, the flood had changed them. The survivors, who had once been human, were transformed into monkeys, creatures that were agile and adaptable, able to live in the trees and survive in the new world. This transformation was not punishment. It was a necessary step in the cycle of life. The monkeys, having survived the flood, were now ready to rebuild the world in a new image. Quetzalcoatl's intervention, though harsh, was a reminder to humanity that the gods had to be honored at all times. The flood was both a cleansing and a warning. The gods would not tolerate disrespect or ingratitude. The new world would not be built on complacency, but on a renewed sense of devotion and respect for the divine. The monkeys, having been transformed by the flood, would go on to repopulate the earth, bringing with them the lessons learned from the Great Flood. The Age of Rain came to a tragic end, but in the aftermath, there was hope. The survivors, transformed and humbled, would face the next cycle with a renewed sense of purpose. The gods, having purged humanity of its pride, now looked to the future, knowing that the world would continue to evolve and change. The flood was just one of many challenges that humanity would face in the cosmic cycle, and the gods were always watching, ensuring that each new age brought with it the possibility of growth, transformation, and renewal. The survivors of the Great Flood, having been transformed into monkeys, represented the resilience of humanity in the face of divine wrath. Quetzalcoatl, ever watchful and wise, had cleansed the earth with the rains, but humanity's journey was far from over. The gods had given them a second chance, a new beginning, but with this gift came a responsibility. The survivors had to rebuild their world with respect, humility, and an understanding that their survival was linked to their reverence for the divine. In the aftermath of the flood, the earth began to recover. The rains had stopped, the waters receded, and a new world was born, one that was both familiar and foreign. The transformed humans, now monkeys, adapted to their new form, finding solace in the trees that dotted the landscape. They lived in harmony with nature, using their agility and intellect to navigate the newly reborn world. Their transformation symbolized the resilience of humanity, the ability to adapt and thrive in the face of change. But this new world, shaped by divine forces, was not without its challenges. As the monkeys looked around them, they knew that the gods were still watching, waiting to see how humanity would fare in this new era. The Age of Water had ended in destruction, but now there was an opportunity for humanity to rise again, this time with greater understanding and reverence for the forces that shaped their world. The gods had given humanity the tools to survive, but it was up to them to use them wisely. However, just as the flood had swept away the old world, the gods knew that new challenges would arise. The earth, in all its beauty and danger, was a place of constant change, and humanity would always be subject to the forces of creation and destruction. Quetzalcoatl, the god of wisdom and life, knew that humanity had to be prepared for these challenges. He had watched over them in their darkest moments, guiding them through the trials of life and death. Now, it was time for the next chapter in the cosmic cycle to unfold. The new era, the Age of Water, brought with it both blessings and curses. The world was abundant with life. Rivers teemed with fish, plants flourished, and the earth itself seemed to thrive under the guidance of the gods. Yet, despite the bounty of the world, the monkeys, humanity's new incarnation, were not content. The transformation, while necessary, left them with a sense of longing. They were no longer the powerful giants of the Wind Age, nor were they fully human. They were something in between, caught between the past and the future, torn between their divine origin and their new, humble existence. In this new world, the monkey's struggle was not one of survival, but of identity. They had been granted a second chance, but what did that mean? Were they still worthy of the gods' favor? Could they truly honor the divine forces that had shaped their world? These were the questions that weighed heavily on their minds. The divine punishment had purged them of their pride, but it had also stripped away their sense of self. Now, as they looked to the future, they had to find a way to reconcile their past and present and forge a new identity. It was during this time of reflection and adaptation that the gods turned their gaze once again to the earth. The world had been transformed, but it was still fragile. The cosmic cycle was in motion, and the gods knew that the challenges humanity faced were far from over. Yet, there was hope. The monkeys, though transformed, still carried within them the potential for greatness. They had learned from the past, and with the guidance of the gods, they could rebuild a new world, one that balanced the forces of creation and destruction, life and death, chaos and order. As the new era began, the gods, including Quetzalcoatl, continued to watch over humanity, knowing that their journey was far from over. The divine lessons had been given, but the test was not yet complete. The next chapter in the cosmic cycle awaited, and humanity's survival depended on their ability to honor the gods, to adapt, and to understand that they were always part of something greater, a cycle that would continue long after their time. As humanity began to settle into the new world, the gods had to face the inevitable truth. The cycle of creation and destruction, life and death, could never truly stop. The gods were not only creators but destroyers, their power shaping the world in ways that both nurtured and challenged humanity. For the Aztecs, every age, no matter how prosperous, was destined to end, making it essential to continue paying homage to the divine. The flood had devastated the old world, purging humanity of its pride and its dependence on the past. Yet, with each cycle, the gods knew that humanity would face another test. In the wake of the flood, the monkeys, the new incarnation of humanity, were struggling to find their place. They had been granted a second chance, but with that chance came a new responsibility: to rebuild, to reconnect with the divine forces that had shaped their existence. Quetzalcoatl, ever wise, understood this struggle and watched as the monkeys began to rebuild their world from the ground up. The new world they faced was both a gift and a challenge. The floodwaters had receded, and the earth had started to heal. But the monkeys, humanity's new form, felt a profound sense of loss. They were not what they once were, nor were they yet fully human. Their transformation had taken away much of what they had known, and in this new world, they were forced to adapt. The divine mandate was clear. Humanity had to evolve, and the old ways would no longer suffice. In the age of water, the gods gave them the chance to rebuild, but now they had to prove their worth in a new, more humble form. Historians still debate whether this transformation was meant to symbolize humanity's capacity for growth, or whether it reflected the Aztecs' belief that every cycle of life requires a kind of spiritual evolution. The monkeys, representing the survivors of the flood, embodied both the resilience of humanity and its potential for renewal. But with this renewal came the challenge of forging a new identity. The gods had granted them the gift of life, but how would they live it? Would they fall into complacency again, as they had in the Age of Rain, or would they learn from the past and honor the gods who had shaped their destiny? In this new world, the monkeys were tasked with honoring the gods through rituals, sacrifices, and devotion. The cycle of life and death had not been interrupted. It had simply taken a new form. The gods, including Quetzalcoatl, remained vigilant, knowing that the future of humanity depended on their ability to remain connected to the divine. The transformation into monkeys was not a punishment, but a reminder that survival required constant adaptation. They could not return to their past glory. They could only move forward, reshaped and renewed by the divine forces that had guided them. This was the beginning of the next phase in the Aztec cosmic cycle. The monkeys, though humble in form, had the potential to bring about a new era of growth and prosperity. They were not merely the survivors of the flood, they were the seeds of the future, a future shaped by divine intervention and the lessons learned from the past. In the eyes of the gods, humanity's journey was far from over. The monkeys were given the chance to rebuild, but they had to do so with a deeper understanding of their place in the grand cosmic order. The gods watched, knowing that the survival of humanity depended on how well they adapted to their new world and honored the divine forces that had shaped their destiny. And so the monkeys began to rebuild. Their world was different now, more challenging, but also more connected to the divine forces that governed all things. With each step they took toward their future, they were reminded that every cycle of life is both an ending and a beginning. The gods, though ever present, would not interfere unless it was absolutely necessary. Humanity, now reborn in this new form, had to take the reins of its destiny and prove that it was worthy of the divine gifts bestowed upon it. The monkeys, though transformed by the flood, carried the weight of their past with them. In the eyes of the gods, their journey was one of redemption, a chance to prove that humanity could rise above its past mistakes and evolve into something greater. The divine forces had granted them another opportunity, and this time there could be no complacency. The gods watched closely, knowing that the survival of humanity was tied to its ability to respect the natural world, honor the divine, and adapt to change. As the new world slowly came to life, the monkeys, representing the rebirth of humanity, began to learn from the divine teachings they had inherited. They no longer took the reins for granted, nor the abundance that had once been so plentiful. With the return of fertility and life, the land flourished. Rivers teemed with fish, plants and trees grew tall, and the earth itself seemed to thrive under the careful stewardship of the gods. The monkeys, guided by the lessons of Quetzalcoatl and the other gods, began to cultivate the earth, sowing maize and other crops that would sustain their new world. In this time of renewal, the monkeys' efforts to rebuild their society were guided by the same principles that had governed their ancestors. However, they soon realized that while they had been gifted with the tools of survival, they would still have to prove themselves worthy of the gods' favor. It was not enough to simply live. Humanity had to live in accordance with the divine order. This was a lesson that had been passed down by the gods, and it was one that would define humanity's place in the cosmic cycle. Historians still wonder whether this period of rebuilding was seen by the Aztecs as a reflection of their own cycles of growth, destruction, and renewal. The monkeys, in their new form, were symbolic of humanity's resilience and ability to adapt to the ever-changing forces of the universe. They were not the same as their ancestors. They were both a product of divine will and the natural order. And just as they had been reborn, they would face further trials and challenges in their new world. Yet, despite their humility, the monkeys were far from helpless. They had been granted the wisdom of the gods and the strength to survive in a world that had been shaped by both creation and destruction. The gods had bestowed upon them the tools to rebuild, but it was up to the monkeys to use these gifts wisely. They were not merely passive recipients of divine favor. They were active participants in the ongoing cycle of life. As the monkeys learned to cultivate the earth and build their society anew, they began to understand that the gods were not distant, all-powerful beings. They were forces of nature that were intimately connected to the world around them. The gods, particularly Quetzalcoatl, had taught humanity the importance of balance between life and death, creation and destruction, chaos and order. This balance was not only necessary for the survival of the world, it was essential for the survival of humanity itself. In this new world, the monkeys began to reconnect with the divine forces that had shaped their destiny. They performed rituals and sacrifices, offering gratitude to the gods for the gift of life and for the fertility of the earth. These sacrifices, however, were not mere acts of obedience. They were expressions of respect, gratitude, and recognition. that humanity's existence was intertwined with the divine order. The gods, though distant in some ways, were always present, guiding humanity's path and ensuring that the cycle of life continued. The monkeys, with their newfound understanding of the divine, were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The gods, ever watchful, had given them the tools to thrive, but it was up to them to maintain their connection to the divine and ensure that the world would continue to evolve. Humanity's survival depended not on their physical strength alone, but on their ability to adapt, learn, and honor the divine forces that had shaped them. As the new era unfolded, the monkeys knew that their journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of a new chapter in the cosmic cycle, one where humanity would continue to evolve, learn, and grow. As the world continued to shift and humanity, now reborn in the form of monkeys, learned to live in harmony with the divine, a new age loomed on the horizon, the age of the fifth sun. The gods had already intervened several times to reset the world, bringing order to the chaos. But now humanity faced its final test. This would not just be another era of prosperity and peace. No, the age of the fifth sun would mark the culmination of everything that had come before, the test of humanity's resilience, adaptability, and devotion to the gods. The Aztecs, however, did not perceive time as linear. Instead, they believed in the cyclical nature of life, where every age was born out of the destruction of the previous one. The age of the fifth sun was no different. It would follow the same pattern as the ages before it: creation, destruction, and rebirth. The gods, as always, had a hand in shaping this new era. The monkeys, humanity's transformed survivors, had been given one final chance, but the gods knew that even this new beginning would require sacrifice. It was in this final era, as the age of the fifth sun began to take shape, that the gods would once again make an ultimate sacrifice to keep the world in motion. The sun itself, they believed, required constant nourishment. The sun's movement across the sky, its daily journey from dawn to dusk, was an act of divine will that needed to be sustained. Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, could not continue his journey without the energy provided by human sacrifice. The Aztecs, understanding this cosmic necessity, viewed these sacrifices not as barbaric acts, but as vital offerings to maintain the sun's eternal motion. This was not a world where the sun moved freely on its own. It was a world where the gods and humanity worked together to ensure survival. In order to keep the sun alive, to ensure that it rose each day and pushed the darkness away, the gods required a payment, a sacrifice of life. The Aztecs believed that their blood was the fuel that kept the sun burning, that their sacrifices were a necessary offering to the gods who had given them life in the first place. Without this blood, the sun would cease to move, and the world would be swallowed by darkness. The monkeys, now part of humanity's future, were not blind to this truth. They understood that survival in this world came at a cost, and that the gods had given them everything, including the earth, the rains, the maize, and the guidance to rebuild their civilization. But in exchange for these blessings, humanity had to give back. It was the ultimate test of their devotion. Every sacrifice made, every drop of blood spilled, was a gift that fueled the very forces that allowed them to exist. The gods, in turn, watched carefully as humanity navigated this new chapter in their cycle. Would the monkeys, now fully formed, humans once again, rise to the occasion? Would they learn from the past, where pride and arrogance led to the fall of previous ages? Or would they once again fall into complacency, forgetting the true cost of their survival? The gods were watching, waiting to see if humanity had learned to honor the delicate balance of life, death, and rebirth. The age of the fifth sun would be marked not just by human sacrifices, but by humanity's ability to stay connected to the divine. Quetzalcoatl, the god of wisdom, remained the guiding force of this new era, teaching the people to live with respect and understanding. But it was clear that the gods would not tolerate any more imbalances. Humanity's actions would shape the fate of the world, and the gods would intervene when necessary. The ultimate question for the Aztecs, and for the monkeys reborn into humanity, was whether they would continue to honor the divine or fall victim to the same mistakes that had plagued previous ages. As the sun rose each day, the Aztecs were reminded that the world they lived in was a gift, one that could be taken away just as easily as it had been given. The sacrifices they made were their way of ensuring that the sun would continue its journey across the sky, that life would continue to flourish, and that the balance of the world would remain intact. But they also knew that each age, no matter how blessed, would eventually come to an end. The sun would eventually burn out, the world would fall into darkness, and the cycle would begin anew. And so, the Aztecs prepared themselves for the future, understanding that the survival of humanity was not just about living. It was about living in accordance with the divine, honoring the gods, and accepting the reality that every beginning must eventually lead to an end. The age of the fifth sun, like all the ages before it, would be both a gift and a test. And the final test of humanity would be to see if they could rise to meet the challenges of this new era and continue the cycle of life that had begun with the gods themselves.